This conference will now be recorded.
It is my great pleasure and honor to interview Susan Quinn for the IPA website. Susan Quinn is the author of 5 books and many articles and features in national and international magazines. She is well known for her biography of Karen Horney, which won her the Globe Winship Award, and also very well known is her biography of Marie Curie, which is translated into many, many languages. She has a knack for strong, if not rebellious women, and that's where I want to start. Susan, how did you come to pick the subjects of your biographies?
Well, my first biography was of Karen Horney, and in my household, it was a little bit of a rebellious choice because my husband is a Freudian, and in the early days, he embraced Freud very enthusiastically. I'd say he's more eclectic now and more nuanced, but then he was a Freudian, and I got to looking at dissidents actually by writing a piece about Heinz Kohut for the New York Times Magazine. It was called Oedipus versus Narcissus, and it was a comparison of Kohut's ideas, which were controversial, still are, I guess, a little bit, comparing them to Freud's. So that got me excited and interested, and then I began to read the work of Karen Horney, and particularly her really magnificent essay, most important one, I think, probably that she wrote called "The Flight from Womanhood," really looking at Freud's ideas about little girls and penis envy, and really kind of turning the whole thing on its head and asking questions about boys' envy of women, men's envy of women. And so anyway, from that led on to my spending 7 years writing a biography of Karen Horney, and of course, the first step was to read Freud and understand what she was rebelling against. But it was really a wonderful experience for me. She turned out to be a fascinating subject who had not really been treated with the seriousness she deserved in a full-length biography. So I encountered also for the first time what I would encounter over and over again with my subjects, which was that they weren't as perfect as I expected them to be. And she was certainly a very flawed woman in some ways, but also a very important one, and somebody I think I would have enjoyed knowing. So she was my first subject, and it was at a time when it ran parallel to my own struggles about my own identity and how to kind of have a separate career, in addition to being a mother and wife. And so she was an inspiring role model, I would say. I always said if Karen Horney were to live now and have a bumper sticker, it would be question authority. Which she certainly did all her life. So that was how she was my first subject, and with some sort of departures along the way, I have pretty much stayed with writing about strong women. And so clearly, because I both admire them and want to be one.
These women were really strong, and given the time they worked at, it was even more amazing how successful they could be. Marie Curie, but also then Eleanor Roosevelt with Lorena Hickok, the double biography that you wrote. Did you learn something about how they could do it, how they could succeed and achieve their goals?
Well, it's interesting to me that very often, particularly with, I would say, Karen Horney and Marie Curie, they did it in part by ignoring a lot of the prejudice against them and kind of carrying on. There's a wonderful photograph of Karen Horney, who went to medical school in Freiburg when there were very few, a handful of women in all of Europe going to medical school. And it's a picture of her with her male colleagues who are all have on their formal gear with their swords and their sashes and so on. And she's standing in the middle of this group holding a skull under her arm in a kind of defiant pose. And that was her style. It was, I dare you, I dare you to say no. When she was very young, she wanted to go take an anatomy class. She was at the gymnasium, which also she was, one of the early women to go to gymnasium. But while she was there, she wanted to take a class in anatomy, and she was refused. And she wrote in her journal, well, I will just have to take myself apart instead. That will be more difficult, but perhaps also more interesting. So you see there the future, it shines a light out into her future as a psychoanalyst. So she was determined and ignored a lot of the barriers, and that was also true of Marie Curie, who often said, when people would ask her, did you encounter prejudice when you were at the Sorbonne? And she would say, everyone was extremely polite and very lovely to me. So, maybe. But I had to kind of I know why she said that is because she didn't want to be pitied, and she didn't want to be made an exception. She wanted to fit in. And I think that was one of the things a lot of these early women did, was to refuse to be seen as anomalies.
Yeah, in the context of the upcoming Congress of the IPA with the subject the feminine, you focus on a few more strong women in the early history of psychoanalysis. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. It's a dramatic presentation that I've written, and that's going to be presented at the Freud Museum in London in May. It's called "What Does Woman Want?" And it is enacted by 5 actors, writers, and all of them in the field except for me. And it's Sigmund Freud and Anna Freud, 4 of the women. The 4 women who were closest to him in the very early days. So it's Anna Freud, Samida Spielrein, Marie Bonaparte, and Lou Andrea Salome. And we called it "What Does Woman Want?", which of course is Freud's famous phrase, saying he never quite figured that out. And all of these women were kind of in a special position in a very constrained time for women, for the most part, but they were wealthy, they were privileged, and of course, in the case of Anna, they were the daughter. So they were daring in their lives, in their sexual lives, in their social lives, and also, of course, in their interest in psychoanalysis. But it provides an interesting contrast to Freud himself, who was daring indeed in his ideas, but not daring at all in his life. And so he was attracted to these women and intrigued by them, but at the same time had, a very conventional wife and family, which was his preference. So that tension and the back and forth is what makes the piece work, I hope.
Susan, that is very inspiring. It seems that you are saying we should just persevere. We can be successful, and you yourself are a wonderful model for this. Thank you for this interview, and good luck. We will hear more from you in the future.
Thank you, Cordelia.